All right, so it's October the 11th, Sunday morning, Sunday school. All right, the lesson today is, if you have a study guide, it's session 8. And the title of the lesson is Pleasing God. The subtitle of it is God's people should seek to please Him in their attitudes and actions. And so this lesson, it's a little bit different than the others because the verses on this, it has Proverbs 15:33 through 16:11, but it sort of skips around again in the verses as we look at them. So I'll go ahead and read those verses because it's the last verse in chapter 15, and then the first 11 in chapter 16. And maybe you'll see a theme here. And before I read this, in the understanding the context, it explains that in Proverbs chapters 10 through 22, it says Solomon gave precept after precept, or little bit of wisdom after bit of wisdom, of wise counsel, truth rooted in the very nature of God. Some have called this section Solomon's proper Proverbs, given in a series of singular truth statements wrapped in maxims, observations, and poetic reflections. And that's a kind of a wordy way of saying, in my Bible, the way it describes it for every one of those chapters, it has a little subheading. Let me pull it open here. And the subheading is Contrast, Righteousness, and Wicked. So chapters 10 through 22, so that's 8 chapters. And all it is it's contrasting righteousness and wickedness. And frequently, and in almost all cases, within a verse, and I'll just, as an example, at the top of the screen here, we're looking at Proverbs 15:27. So look at what it says. He that is greedy of gain troubleth his own house, but he that hateth gifts shall live. So you can see in that verse, it talks about the wicked, he that's greedy of gain. He is someone that's greedy and wants and wants and wants, troubleth his own house. So that brings trouble to his own house. But he that hateth gifts, someone who's not greedy or covetous, shall live. So there's a contrast. The greedy person is troubling his own house. He's causing problems. He that hates gifts, he that's not greedy and maybe even generous, shall have a good life. Okay, verse 28: The heart of the righteous studieth to answer, but the mouth of the wicked poureth out evil things. So you can see that contrast right there in one verse. There's a contrast of righteousness versus wickedness. And again, that's chapters 10 through 22. And it's just bam, bam, bam. Proverb after proverb. Okay, so that's the context of the lesson, the verses today is that contrast. So I'll read 33 of chapter 15 through 11, and then we'll just get into the lesson. So starting in Proverbs 15:33, the fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom. Now we've heard that before, right? In the beginning of Proverbs, it said the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and that's in the Bible a couple of places. So that's kind of one of the themes again today, to emphasize fear of the Lord, and there's an accountability associated with that as well once you have knowledge of the Lord. So let me start again, and I'll just read through it. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. The preparations of the heart in man, and the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of a man are clean in his own eyes, but the Lord weigheth the spirits. Commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thoughts shall be established. The Lord hath made all things for himself, yea, even the wicked for the day of evil. Every one that is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished. By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil. When a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues without right. A man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. A divine sentence is in the lips of the king, his mouth transgresseth not in judgment. A just weight and balance are the Lord's, all the weights of the bag are his work. All right, so in that particular passage, as I just mentioned, how there's in a lot of the verses in these chapters, there's a contrast within the verse. If you were paid attention, you heard, in these, there wasn't necessarily that direct contrast of good versus evil. So now, as we get into the study guide, we'll look at the individual verses and just kind of see the overall message of what he's trying to say here. And again, it kind of studies the verses not quite in that order. So I'm on page 74. Let me just see if there's, in the understand the context, kind of the overall big picture of what the lesson says. And we talked about how those chapters 10 through 22 kind of give those bullet hits of wisdom, contrasting righteousness versus wickedness. But one of the other things it says in the introduction is the wisdom of God is both particular and general. Particular in that it addresses the issues of life often in great detail, and it does. He gives very specific guidance in some of his proverbs. But also, it's general in that God's wisdom is comprehensive in addressing a whole host of the challenges of daily living. And again, that applies to us today. There are all sorts of, we talked about last week, every decision that you make, some decisions you make in a very quick manner, a snap decision, you have to. When you're driving, I'm going to turn left, I'm going to turn right. When you're walking, when you're talking, if you're involved in sports or something, you're constantly making decisions in your life, and you don't have time necessarily to stop and pray over every decision you make. So hopefully you have that background that helps you when you need to make a decision quickly to make it in the right way. Some big decisions you need to stop and contemplate and seek God's wisdom and guidance when you make those decisions, and hopefully He will help you in making a decision. But so there's both the wisdom of God is both particular and general. Particular can address very specific things. The general is His wisdom is comprehensive in addressing the challenges of daily living. But the bottom line in either case, it says God's wisdom supersedes all other sources of wisdom. We talked about this last week. No matter how smart you are, how educated you are, and how wise you think you are, without God's intervention or without God's help in making decisions, you're making decisions as a person. And human beings naturally are not, they don't have the best interests of others in their hearts. That's just human nature. So hopefully by having God in us, it helps us to make good decisions for both ourselves, to glorify God, and on behalf of those around us. Okay? And just to tie this with Solomon, Old Testament, and the Gospel, the wisdom Solomon called God's people to pursue was fully revealed and embodied in the person and work of Jesus Christ. The Gospel of Jesus, it says, is the power of God and the wisdom of God. That's from Corinthians. To know Jesus is to know the wisdom of God that changes how we think and act. Now, the last thing in the introduction, it says, one of the mistakes we often make when thinking about the wisdom of God is to separate the pursuit of wisdom from God Himself, as if the wisdom of God was distinct from the person of God. Now, let me just summarize that. It says to pursue God's wisdom means to pursue God Himself. This one truth changes everything. So it's good to be wise. It's good to be smart. It's not the end all and the be all. Again, without God as part of your wisdom and your decision making, your decisions are ultimately not going to be the best that they could be. And they may be good and transient in this human life, but they may not carry you into the best place in eternity. So as Christians, we know this. Just trying to relate it to us. All right, so now I'm on page 75. The first two verses that it talks about are verse 33 of chapter 15 and verse 8. And again, just to refresh our memory, so verse 33 says, this is CSB now, the fear of the Lord is what wisdom teaches, and humility comes before honor. So let's just take that at face value. There's that fear of the Lord is what wisdom teaches. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So so if you have fear of the Lord, that's the beginning of the wisdom. But then as you become more wise, it reinforces that your wisdom should be based in the fear of the Lord. So it's almost a circular argument. And then the last thing, in humility comes before honor. So there's verse 33. Now, 16, verse 8 says, better a little with righteousness than great income with injustice. And we'll come to both of those here in just a second. All right, so let's start in verse 33. I'm on page 75. Solomon called his readers to please God by pursuing and applying wisdom, coupled with two basic reminders. First, The basis of the pursuit of God's wisdom is the fear of the Lord. I've talked about that enough. Second, it says the pursuit of God's wise counsel humbles the believer. Solomon reminded God's people that in the pursuit of godly wisdom, they were to demonstrate humility. Now, here's another thing that especially is depending on, I don't know, let's see, only children. I think, let's see, Jasmine, you're the only one here who doesn't have brothers and sisters. Do you have close cousins? So no close family kids that's kind of your age. So particularly, well, so there's a good contrast. And so personality-wise, generally speaking, if you are around a lot of, and of course in the house, if there are a lot of kids, you kind of have to fight for your place. And I don't mean literally fight, although, sometimes we do. Right. So you kind of have to fight for your place, for your identity in a family. And that can be, if you have a big group of friends, you're kind of struggling there as well, or trying to establish yourself. And so what's important is, what's that? Well, so where I was going with that is, again, for me, I was very, very shy. Now, I had two brothers growing up. One was 2.5 years younger. The other was 7 years younger. So my youngest brother, he was just a baby for a lot of my growing up years, and then I left, and he kind of grew up after I left the house. But I had a lot of cousins that were very close. We were together all the time. Okay, but still, when I was out in public, I was very shy, or school or whatever. So my point in this is, those that are kind of immersed around people, you can tend to build a bit of confidence, and that's important. Sometimes it's hard to toot your own horn or blow your own horn because you want to be humble, but maybe inside, okay, I can do things. I'm smart. I have a talent. What you don't want to do is be braggadocious about that. You want to be humble in all things. That doesn't mean that you can't have an inner confidence, right? So, and so the first part of this, again, it says, Solomon reminded people that in the pursuit of godly wisdom, they were to demonstrate humility. They were to come to God as humble servants, knowing they were in need of Him and ready to please Him. Solomon emphasized that true honor is rooted in the kind of wisdom that is humble, contrite, and dependent on God. So have a confidence, but publicly you need to be humble, okay? And that's people will gravitate more to the humble and confident person. I will refer to it kind of as a natural leader. You don't have to be the student body president, as an example, the captain of the team, whether it be the debate team or the football team or whatever it is. But you can be a leader in how you carry yourself, your confidence, and at the same time, your humility will make you approachable to people. Okay, and that's what Solomon is saying here. In your search for wisdom, you need to be humble as it relates to God. Now, the second verse that's covered here, it has to do with wealth. That's verse 8 and 16. Better a little with righteousness than great income with injustice. And I love the way they describe this in the study guide. I'm on page 75 again. It's the second paragraph under about verse 8. It says, Solomon declared that humbly revering God is more valuable than great wealth. And that's kind of hard to reconcile sometimes. I mean, hopefully, everyone wants to pursue a good life for themselves. And I mean a good life in every way. Hopefully you find a good, partner, a good, spouse, ultimately a good spouse. But that's not, Paul was single his whole life. Jesus Christ obviously was single. He never married. So you don't have to, but that makes a good life if you have a good partner, and that's why you got to be careful as you select those people that you date and then ultimately hopefully marry, that you're equally yoked. So again, I kind of talk with Cheryl and Mandy about, I hope Mandy, my prayer is that she finds a good man and is married, because it's very rewarding to have a good spouse. Where do you find that? Well, the best place to me is hopefully the easiest place to start finding someone that's like-minded, if you're a Christian, is in church. Okay, that doesn't mean that you have to find your mate, your spouse, in church, but it's a good place to start. Okay, because if you're just out there in the world, you don't know exactly what you're getting, and it's not. I won't say don't date someone like that. Pastor Richard would counsel to be careful about that, but I would say you need to ascertain relatively quickly about what that person believes versus what you do. Because if they're not a Christian and you are, then one of you is going to pull the other one way or the other. Okay, and sometimes it's more difficult to pull them to us than vice versa. So I'm going to stop on that because again, the point of this is wealth. All right, so Solomon declared that humbly revering God is more valuable than great wealth. Material wealth is neutral. So money. If I take $100 bill and set it on this table, that $100 bill, does it hurt anybody? No, it cannot hurt somebody. So is money evil? No, and that's what they're saying here. Material wealth is neutral. The money itself, things, a nice car, a nice house, they're neutral. Okay. Now, the next step, though, the next point in this lesson, it says how a person obtains and uses wealth is another manner. And it reminded me of 1 Timothy 6:10. Anybody have an idea of what that says relating to money? There you go. And what Cheryl said first, a lot of people, especially ones who, I won't say especially ones who, some people, I guess there are people who maybe self-righteously, if they see someone who has money, say, well, that person's got money, so money's evil. Money's the root of all evil. And a lot of people have that perception or that understanding, and I would say that they need to read it again. Cheryl got it right. Look at the verse there on the screen, 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and by craving it, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So that kind of ties back into the lesson. Material wealth is neutral. Money is not a problem. Okay. Now, not having money, I mean, you need the necessities of life. And so what I would encourage you there with respect to that is, as young people, that's why it's important to work, study in school, keep a clean life, have an ambition. You don't need to know if I said, Haley, tell me right now what you're going to be with your life. You don't have to know that right now. Well, and that's my point. That's right. Well, what's important, though, is to be thinking ahead a little bit. My dad never said to me, here's what you're going to do with your life. He was more of a, what do you think you might be interested in? And then when I expressed an interest, he encouraged it to kind of say, okay, not saying, okay, you wrote it down on paper or you said it, that's what you're going to do, but to help encourage me. And the point was to work. Okay, if that's what you want to do, let's think about the steps that you need to be able to get to there. If you want to be a doctor, a pilot, a lawyer, if you want to be a construction worker, a ditch digger, whatever it is, there is no, if you have an ambition, hopefully no one will ever denigrate or put down. Well, let's just put it this way. If you have no money and you have no food and you want to earn money to take care of yourself, and that's the ultimate objective to me, is every person should have an instinct in them to want to be able to take care of themselves, not to have things handed to them. Okay. And the only thing available to make money is, hey, I need someone to help me at my house. I'm kind of old, and or I've got a job and I can't do the work, and that's kind of where that comes from. People say that as sort of like a ditch digger is one of the lowest forms, and I mean that in terms of it's just manual labor. I was going to say you don't have to have a lot of smarts to do it, but you do. I mean, everything requires some knowledge and ability. So I would say that there's not a resume position of ditch digger, but what it means is, to me, it's a basic form of work, and the objective of it is to provide for yourself, no matter if it gets down to it, and I can't do anything else. I want to do something. Compare it to, I'll be a greeter at Walmart. I'll be an associate at Home Depot. Those are not necessarily formal education required, and a lot of skill required kind of things. But the point of it is to have that ambition. All right. Uh, so again, it's the love of money, pursuing it. When you start saying, okay, I really want to have a lot of money, well, why? And again, that goes to how a person obtains and uses wealth is another matter. If I will do anything I have to make more money, cheat people, cut corners, steal, obviously that's not good. If I'm making money because I want to glorify myself, um, not the best motivation. Money itself is not a problem. The motivation, and then what you do with it can be potentially the problem. Okay. Let me go back here to Proverbs 16. Questions on that? Thanks for the interaction. And I would say, and again, I say that that's sort of a I don't know, an expression, I guess. And again, because it's a sort of an unskilled type of position. I would always encourage people to. You don't have to shoot to be the Ben Carson pediatric neurosurgeon who operates on babies in the womb kind of a person. Okay, that's a pretty wow kind of a job, right? To think about now the education that had to go into that, the time.
A lot of years of college and money.
Well, that's the other part of it too. So if that's what you want to be, if you want to be a doctor, you need to think about that. It's not just, well, I think I'm going to be a doctor, and it just someone waves a wand and it happens. That sets you on a path of you need to investigate what it requires. As an example, my dad years and years ago was reading the paper and he said, "Hey, look at this article," and talked about airline pilots. And he goes, "Well, that looks like a good job." So he sort of planted a seed in my mind. And then I said, okay, that sounds good to me. Wasn't really sure that was it. Well, then, now he's, all right, let's talk about it. What is the path required? And, one of the requirements was you have to have a college degree. Well, how are you going to pay for that college degree? Hey, have you ever heard of this Air Force Academy? Okay, so he sort of helped me get steered that way, helped me do the applications and all that. Ultimately, and this is a very crude paraphrase on the lines of salvation. If my mom or dad was saved, does that guarantee me getting into heaven? Absolutely not. Okay. My dad, even though he helps me to fill out paperwork, to have an idea of what I want to do, does he get me into the Air Force Academy? Absolutely not. I have to play a part, right? As with salvation, I have to make the transaction with God. Okay. I had to do the work in high school. I had to, study, do preparation for SATs. And the first time I applied when I graduated, I did not get into the academy. Okay, so failure happens, and it isn't the end necessarily. It depends on how you respond. Okay, so anyway, so I got off on a tangent there. But again, when you decide kind of where you think you want to go, you got to work toward it. All right, let's move on to the next section. All right, so the second one now, the verses that it talks about are verses 1, 4, and 5, and then 9. And I'm going to go through these because we've used a lot of our time. But so verse 1, the reflections of the heart belong to mankind, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. This kind of goes to how God allows man to have a free will, but ultimately God is in control, God is sovereign, and there will be an accountability at some time. So the reflections of the heart belong to mankind. We do have the ability, based on our heart, to do and what we that I can relate that to what we know, what we feel, and hopefully Holy Spirit is present in our heart, so it will influence what we do and how we do it. The reflections of the heart belong to mankind. Ultimately, it's my choice, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. So God knows. God knows exactly what we're going to do before we ever do it, but He allows us to do the right thing or the wrong thing. That's our choice. But in the end, everyone will be accountable. Okay? Even Christians have an accounting, although again, it's to Christ for your works, not to God for rejecting you. All right? Now, the second set of verses is 4 and 5. Verse 4 and 5 say, the Lord has prepared everything for His purpose, even the wicked, for the day of disaster. Everyone with a proud heart is detestable to the Lord. Be assured He will not go unpunished. And again, this talks about God knows, God has, He's aware of the good and the bad, the wicked and the righteous. Let's see, and on page 76, it says, Solomon added, even the wicked fall under God's sovereign rule. All things, both good and evil, are under the sovereign control of God. In the end, all people are accountable for their responses. And it says, when these truths are applied to the work of God in Christ, we're reminded of Acts 2:23. So again, relating Solomon's word, Old Testament, to New Testament, gospel, Jesus Christ. Acts 2:23, though he, Jesus, was delivered up according to God's determined plan and foreknowledge, you used lawless people to nail him to a cross and kill him. So that was the actual verses from Acts that Luke wrote. It says, God had already determined to offer up Jesus as the sacrifice for sinners before time began. Yet those who killed Jesus, all of us, because man and our sin ultimately is responsible for Jesus' death, will be held accountable. So I was telling Pastor Richard and Brad and Bill, we have a meeting, on Sunday mornings before we start Sunday school. And a couple of weeks ago, that program called The Return. It was an effort, an attempt, meeting in Washington, D.C. on the Washington Mall, the National Mall, between the Washington Monument and Capitol. A lot of people, I've read reports of as many as, I think it was, tens of thousands of people were there for the event over the course of the day. But one of the things that the gentleman who put it together and kind of led it, he's a Jewish Christian. And at the end, he was praying. And of course, it was a day of just prayer and trying to get the nation to think about 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray, seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. That was the point of it, was try to get people to think back to that passage, what we as a nation, particularly the Christians, if my people, which are called by my name, Christians, need to repent, be humble, pray. So anyway, Jonathan Cahn was the gentleman that did this, and as he was praying at the end, he turned toward the Capitol building, and he's asking God to be with us in this election that's coming up. And he said, and I'll paraphrase it, but God, over the history, God has used leaders in his way. God's will be done. Hopefully we're on board and we're participating in how God would want us to live and act in a godly way. But with respect to this election, he said over the course of history, God has used leaders as vessels to do his good work. Think about a Moses, a David, a Solomon. God used them to do his good work. But he also said God has used and can use leaders as vessels, but he can also use them as a judgment. You think about Pharaoh. You can think about when after Solomon died and Israel split, God's kingdom, the Jews split into two groups. There was Israel and Judah, and they fought against each other. They kind of went away from God again. And so God used the kings that were around them as vessels, and they attacked them. Ultimately, they captured them. They took them away from their land. They made them kind of subservient to them. So God used those rulers, those leaders, as judgments. Okay, so that was the point of the return, was to kind of get us to turn back to God as a nation. All right, and it's for that purpose. God uses wicked and the just; all are going to be accountable to him. All right, and in verse 5 it says, verse 4 said, "Even the wicked fall under God's rule." One expression of a wicked and sinful heart is pride. So there's verse 5. Everyone with a proud heart is detestable to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished. And pride is probably the hardest thing to overcome, to get you to reconcile. If you're arguing with your friends, with your family, with your spouse, with your brother, your sister, I'm not going to go to them. They're going to come to me. Okay, why should I make the first move to reconcile? Pride is, it can stop you there. Pride can stop you when you think about salvation. Fear, maybe it's I'm afraid to step out of that aisle. If you remember, think about how when you were saved, maybe if you're being convicted and you go, wow, the pastor's message today, it really spoke to me, which is Holy Spirit speaking to me. I need to walk up there and rededicate my life. Or if it's the first time to admit that I'm a sinner and I need God and pray with the pastor, what keeps you from doing it? A lot of times it's pride. You can think, well, I'm afraid. I don't want to be embarrassed. Well, that's pride. Pride can be a bad thing. As it relates to the verse again, everyone with a proud heart is detestable to the Lord. when you will not humble yourself ultimately, when you reject him, that's when you're going to pay the ultimate penalty, eternity. All right, verse 9. A person's heart plans his way, but the Lord determines his steps. And again, that reinforces, it says it's in a person's heart that plans take shape. Therefore, we decide the way we'll go based on what's in our hearts. But with our decision comes accountability to God. All right. And I'm going to show you one more verse, Jeremiah 17:9. Because anytime I think about the heart, here's just a reminder for you. Jeremiah 17:9. This is just Jeremiah talking about the heart. The heart is more deceitful. This is, again, the human being, without any intervention from God or without relying on God or knowing God. This is our nature. The heart is more deceitful than anything else and incurable. Who can understand it? Okay. And let me just give you a King James, because if maybe you've heard it this way before. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Okay, that's human nature. Because of selfishness. Now, the question is answered in verse 10. The heart's deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, the Lord, search the heart. So God, this is God saying, I know your heart. I can look into your heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings. So let me translate that for you again in a little bit more modern English. Verse 10, I, the Lord, examine the mind. I test the heart to give to each according to his way, according to what his actions deserve. So the heart is important because from the heart is where all of our decisions are made, because it's based on what we know, what we think. Of course, the brain's involved too. But if you think about Holy Spirit in your heart, there's that root of how we should be influenced. Okay, but the heart on its own for human beings is desperately wicked and deceitful. Okay, so remember that, and hopefully let that guide you. As Christians, again, we know how we should act. Sometimes outside influences, and maybe even from inside of us, we're tempted, and it can affect us badly. All right. Verses 2 and 10. This says motives matter. So 16:2. All a person's ways seem right to him, but the Lord weighs motives. Now there's human nature again. When I make a decision, hopefully I've considered it. Hopefully I've considered the Lord, and I make a decision. All a person's ways seem right to him. I've convinced myself, whether I'm a Christian or not, hopefully I've thought about things, but I've convinced myself that this is the right thing to do. But the Lord weighs motives. Okay, we'll come to that in just a second. Verse 10, God's verdict is on the lips of a king. His mouth should not give an unfair judgment. And then verse 11, honest balances and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his concern. So let's look at those two separately. Verse 2, pleasing God involves, get back up here, you can see it. Pleasing God involves right motives as well as right actions. So again, that goes to how you make your decisions. The two cannot be separated, the motive and the action. Even a right deed can be done out of the wrong motivation. Think about that for a minute. And I think of it as, and I'm relating a lot of this to money, but so if you have means, okay, you've got enough to provide for you, your family, if you have a family, to pay your bills, your mortgage, your loan on your car, things like that, to feed yourself, to clothe yourself. I mean, these are the basic things. I would encourage you to always seek to work. Number one, pay God. Please, just keep that in your mind. And it's hard to do sometimes, especially starting out when your paycheck is not real high. Okay, tithe, pay God, because I will tell you from my experience, from my life, God rewards those, and there's sometimes that it's difficult to do. Again, starting out particularly, pay God first. Then what's left, you have to pay. You have to take care of yourself, your necessities. You need to have a place to live. You got to eat. Okay, those are necessities. A car, that may be a luxury. You may be a bicycle. It may be walk if you're close enough to get where you're going. It may be ask someone to help you, give you a ride. Okay, pay God first. Pay yourself. Now, after that's done, the rest of your money, if you have money, it's called disposable income, discretionary income. That means at my discretion, I'll spend it how I want. If I want a new pair of shoes, if I want a little bit nicer set of clothes than what jeans is adequate, but I want the designer, whatever. Levi, whatever your brand of jeans are, the regular ones are okay, but I really want to pay the extra for the ones that have holes all in them. as I roll my eyes, right? See, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, but if what? I don't want Jesus. Well, whatever it is, some decisions I don't understand. If it's for fashion, and again, that goes back to pride. And I won't say that there's all different ways of pride. Okay.
Borrow a lot of money.
Huh? Well, exactly. But now the basic thing to clothe yourself, that's the necessity, right? You have to clothe yourself before you go to the house. What's that?
Or you can't go to public.
Exactly. So you have to clothe yourself, and then once you have the money to do that, extra money, now you can say, I want to dress a little bit nicer, whatever nicer is in your mind. Okay. Or you think about, okay, I gave to God, I've taken care of my necessities, I have extra money. Wow, maybe I could give a little bit of that money to this thing, this cause, okay, whatever it is. And I'm not saying that, your tithe I look at that as sort of an obligation. Everything else above that is discretionary. If you give it to God, I think that'll be rewarded. But if you want to spend it on yourself, you shouldn't feel guilty about that once you've taken care of your obligation. But so, again, that's considering how you act and your motives. Okay, even a right deed can be done out of the wrong motivation. So let's go to the other side, to a different example. Let's just take a billionaire, and we'll take a generic one. I'm not going to add any name. I'm not going to put any names on it. But think about someone who's made a lot of money, and there are a lot of people in technology these days who have made, and young. Some are older, some are pretty relatively young, have made literally billions of dollars, or billionaires. They take their money, and we'll take one who is not a Christian, okay, as an example. They've got a lot of money. They take that money and they are philanthropists, which means that they take their money to try to do good things. In their mind, what are good things? They give to causes that they believe in, okay, whatever that is. And whether I would agree with the cause they give it to, let's say that they take money and they give it to the Open Arms Pregnancy Center, which is over here on Haywood Road, and that's for girls. I don't know if ages matter, but women who get pregnant, whether they're married or not, I don't think they discriminate. They don't care. But a person who is pregnant and now they have to make a decision, either they are young, single, old, single. They feel like they can't afford a baby, whatever the reason is, and they're having to decide whether they want to keep that baby or allow that baby to live, right, to be born. This place, what they try to do is encourage these women to have the baby, even if it's to adopt it or whatever. Okay, so let's just say this billionaire, he gives $1 million to Open Arms Crisis Pregnancy Center. So, I would look at that and go, wow, that's a good deed. Okay, their motivation may be, I believe in that cause or whatever it is. They may say, I'm going to give a lot of money to another cause like Planned Parenthood, which, provides for abortions, which, takes a young baby and, it gets rid of that problem is how they look at it. I would disagree with that use of money. Okay. Regardless of whether the unsaved person, whether their motive and their cause I agree with, or their motive and cause I disagree with, without God in that. And obviously, if I don't think God could be in that decision to give money to something that goes against what the Bible would teach. At the end of the day, when this life ends, they're going to be judged. Okay, so when you think about motive and what they do, at the end of it, they're going to be judged. As a Christian, hopefully, I give my money based on things that I believe and know from the Bible, those causes. So hopefully you would never look at my books and see that I gave money to something and you go, well, you supported that. That, in my opinion, doesn't track with what the Bible would say. Okay.
A lot of people that have that much money beer and stuff like that.
Well, and again, that is a choice that people make with your discretionary money. And, with that in mind, personally, I have drank in my life. I don't anymore because I honestly, and I would encourage you to think of it this way too. Try to just sit down and think of what good comes out of drinking, drugs, whatever that thing is, the decision that you're making. What good is there? Is it because I want to be seem social with my friends? That's not a good reason because it's expensive. It can get you in a lot of trouble, and ultimately you can have real bad adverse effects. Okay. All right. So anyway, back to the motives. It says it is easy to think that because we do the right thing that God will bless us. even if our reason for doing the right thing is wrongly motivated. It is obvious when evil deeds are done out of a sinful heart. What is not so obvious to us is when our motivations for doing what is good are not God honoring. So again, that goes to doing, even if you're doing the right thing, all a person's ways seem right to him, but the Lord weighs motives. So whatever you do, God looks at it. He's going to judge it based on your motive, and I would say that's relative to your relationship with Him. So always kind of consider that. All right. I'm not the last one it talks about in verse 11, 10 and 11. It's talking about the king. God's verdict is on the lips of the king. His mouth should not give an unfair judgment. Kings actually did judge in a lot of cases. Cases were brought right to them, and they had to use discernment to give a good, fair judgment, not favoritism, not for different motives, but fair. And God is involved in that. And the last one is honest balances and scales with the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are His concern. And what that went to was the merchants back in the day, they didn't have coins. So to pay for things, you used like maybe a piece of gold. Well, it didn't say this piece of gold is worth $5. They had to weigh it. And some merchants, they would have a set of weights that are supposedly good and true. Some would cheat and say, okay, that piece of gold, if it really was supposed to be a pound, they would put on there and say they'd have a heavier weight that maybe was really only a half a pound, but it made it balance. That's only half a pound, so it's worth less, and they would cheat. And all this is saying is that no matter what you are, whether you're a merchant or not, the weights that you use need to be true. They need to be correct. All right. Okay, let me just finish with the bullet points. Believers demonstrate wisdom by seeking to please God in all they do. All people are accountable to the sovereign God. Pleasing God is born out of a right relationship with Him and is seen in the right attitudes and actions. And then finally, God's blessing on those who please Him are seen in Him giving stability. These are the things that God gives in return for those who please Him. He gives stability, He rescues from sin, and He gives peaceful relationships with others. Okay, that's what God rewards us with. And then that's, of course, in addition to eternity with Him. All right. Questions? Comments?